Thank you very much, Ojiji. Um, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me.
Participants, please respond.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. It's my pleasure to be here once again to share this learning experience with you. As I always say, for every workshop or training that I facilitate, it's not just a learning experience for the participants, but also for myself. Thank you for making our time to be here with us today. I also want to thank the Institute once again for giving me the opportunity to share this learning experience, and also the Education Committee for deeming it fit for me to be able to share my experience with the participants today. So we'll quickly dive right into our presentation today. I know that we've listened vividly to Mr. Francis Olawale, FCIS. I always enjoy his sessions. They're always very impactful, and I hope that we'll have a similar experience during this session. I'll go ahead right now to share my slides. Okay. Can you all see my screen, please? Secretary, please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. All right. Okay. So today we're going to be looking at company secretarial practice, application of corporate governance code, and best practices for organizational success. This is going to be an interactive session. As much as we can, I want to also learn from you, like I said initially. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box, and then we can pick up the questions either at the end of the session or in between the session, depending on what the question is, please, so that if I don't answer it immediately, you don't feel that your question is being ignored. Thank you. So we look at organizations and corporate governance. I mean, the purpose of every organization at the end of the day is to achieve success. There is no shareholder who wants to set up his business just to play around with money. At the end of the day, bottom line matters, and shareholders want to have a return on their investments. However, for any organization to achieve success, there are two things that must come together to help them to achieve this: compliance and governance. Now, under compliance, we have the structures, the policies, and the procedures. So you must have adequate structure in place. You must have your procedure, your policies in place, and those policies, must be followed by various procedures. We've had experiences in the past where people have documents of policies and they're just lying under the shelf. And maybe during the process of board evaluation, when you ask them for these various policies, they dust them up and they say, yes, the policies are here. They've gathered dust over the years. So it's not just important to have these policies. They must be policies that we must be able to implement and follow the procedures that are laid down to implement them. To implement these policies, we have people. And when we talk of people, we mean right from the board of directors, the management, and then cascades down to the other members of the organization. Now, the people must follow the governance framework that has been laid out in the organization. That's the only way things can work. Now, when you continually imbibe that governance framework into your system, it becomes a culture for you. So anything that goes outside that seems to be a sort of deviation for you. So when it becomes a culture, governance becomes a culture, compliance becomes a culture for you, there is every possibility, that that organization is going to enjoy success at the end of the day. Now let's look at ourselves as chartered secretaries and company secretaries and our roles. Now, over the years, our roles has continued to evolve from just people who take minutes during board meetings, and we've become guidance to the boards. We're not just only managers of meetings. We've also gone beyond the realms of having meetings to also being representatives of the company in various government agencies. Now, I remember that recently we're having an interview. We're having an interview for somebody who was, I think, applying for the role to assist the company secretary in one of our organizations. And then when we had asked, do you understand the role of the company secretary? He said, yes, I understand what the role is. And then what is the company secretary? Are those ones that type minutes and they take shorthand and all that. So clearly, I mean, that used to be the impression of people in the past, but we know that our role has continued to, grow over the years. And right now, many of us sit as board advisors. We tell directors what they're supposed to do. And like Mr. Alawale said towards the end of his presentation, many of us have come out to become chief compliance officers. I know that when I was training to become a chartered secretary, one of the very last things on my mind was probably looking at compliance. But over the years, my role has grown beyond just even being company secretary to something much more than that. So at the center of our role is compliance. And then when we talk of compliance, we now have various codes and various regulations that help us to be able to achieve this successfully. The introduction of the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, provides a framework to ensure good corporate governance practice in both the public and the private sector. Now, we know that in the past we've had, and they're still in existence anyway, we've had several codes that, especially in the public sector, that have been guiding companies. So we have things like the CBN code, we have the SEC code, we have the PENCOM code, and all that. However, if you look at Nigeria, and I always want to look at Nigeria holistically, because if you talk of corporate governance, we're still trying to grow in that area. When you look at Nigeria, you see that many companies, especially in the private sectors, are still lagging behind in terms of corporate governance. And that's because they feel that there's no umbrella code to sort of guide them in what they're supposed to do. So with the introduction of the NCCG 2018, that brought together both the public sector and the private sector to have like a minimum standard of what they're supposed to use to help themselves to become better governance practitioners in their organizations. Now, Principle 8 of the NCCG 2018 states that the company secretary has the primary duty of assisting the board and management in implementing this code and developing good corporate governance practices and culture. It is not just for us to say that we come to meetings and then we take meetings. Gone are the days when the company secretary is just seen and not heard. These days we're heard, and we must be heard very, very well. At the center of our work, I always say that the company secretary is the heartbeat of the company. The company secretary is the conscience of the company. And we must make consistent efforts to drive our boards to do the right thing. Otherwise, I mean, we'll just probably be puppets sitting at board meetings and, doing whatever the directors push us around to do. The attainment of corporate sustainability, which is what the code promotes, because at the end of the day, what the code is trying to promote is for business to be able to outlive their founders, for businesses to, survive whatever turmoils that would come. Look at in the last 1 year, or even going on almost to 2 years now, what we've been experiencing with COVID. Now, any business that is not properly structured to survive this period, and we know that so many companies during this period have gone under. And so we must begin to take a proper perspective of the place of corporate governance, in our organizations. And that is what the code tries to promote. As company secretaries, we play a vital role in ensuring the application of the code for organizational success. So the first question we must begin to ask ourselves is, how familiar are we with the NCCG code? So if you've not had a copy, or if you don't have a copy of that code, please, I encourage us passionately to please pick up a copy and then go through it and understand what it entails. Given a background of the code, in 2016, the FRC released 3 drafts of the Code of Corporate Governance, one for private companies, one for public companies, and then one for not-for-profit entities. If you had followed that process, 2016, 2017, you would have seen that there was so much debate about whether these codes should be practiced or whether they shouldn't be practiced. At the end of the day, the codes were suspended. And then this led to, the development of the current code that we're using, which consolidates codes for private and public companies, while the non-for-profit entities have remained suspended. However, like I said at the beginning, the NCCG code doesn't take away the codes that we've had previously. So we still have the set codes, we still have other codes that govern various companies. And what the code tries to do is to entrench and encourage better corporate governance practices in Nigerian companies. I always say that usually I don't have an issue with public companies because, with the set code there, they tend to do the right thing. However, a lot needs to be done in our private sector. A lot needs to be done because that, I would probably say 80% of our business today in Nigeria is basically the private sector. And if we're not getting it right in the private sector, then it's just a total collapse of the Nigerian system. It's not always, we're always very good at pointing hands to government, that government is not doing the right thing, government is not doing this, government is not doing that. At the end of the day, I always ask, what do we as individuals and as companies also do to help to improve the situation we have on ground? The code is principle-based with apply and explain, as against apply or explain that we have in some other codes like the CBN and the SET code. So what it encourages companies to do is, apply the code. And when you've applied the code, please explain why you applied it in relation to what you do in your various companies. So if, for instance, you say that you've carried out a board evaluation, for instance, why did you carry out that board evaluation? You did it, how did you do it? And what is the essence, what were you able to achieve in it? So it's not it's not a code that carries a stick to flog us around when we're not doing things correctly, but what it does is actually to try to promote the entrenchment of corporate governance in our companies. And it's monitored through the sectoral regulators. So every company has a sector it belongs in, and then those sectors have the different regulators, and they're the ones that impose appropriate sanctions for infractions based on the various sectoral laws and regulations. However, I need to note that in as much as we have sectoral regulators, not many of them are doing the right thing. Like Ajibola said towards the end of the last session, sometimes our regulators tend to create more problems for us. Sometimes they don't even know what they're supposed to do. They honestly don't know what they're supposed to do. There's a case we have recently that popped up in one of our sister companies, and then it's a filing we've been doing. This company has been registered for almost like 10 years. We have expatriates in that company, and we've been filing quota returns for the last 10 years. We've been filing quota returns. Recently, we did a change of name of the company, and then we informed the Ministry of Interior that we're doing this change of name for the company. And then they come back to say, you know what? this company is not registered on the portal of Ministry of Interior. And one of the things I was asking the CEO, if I said that all the various documents, all the expatriate quota and everything that we've been receiving from the Ministry of Interior concerning that company is fake. And yesterday I asked one of the CEOs, I said, I really don't understand why they say it's fake. Every year we renew the SEPA cards for the expatriates. Every month, quota returns are filed. Now, if we've done this consecutively for 10 years, how can you come back after 10 years to say that this document is fake? And you know what he said? So that he has made inquiries, and they say that there's no system, there's no check and balance to check what is being submitted. They just collect the hard documents from you, and then that's fine. They issue whatever they want to issue. So a lot also needs to be done in terms of the regulators that we have on ground. Some of them clearly don't even know what they're regulating. So I always say that it's not just for private and public companies to practice corporate governance. Even the government institutions also need to begin to overhaul themselves so that when we are going down this road of corporate governance, we can all go down the road together and be able to understand what we're all doing properly. The code is structured into, is broken down into 7 parts, and these 7 parts contain 28 corporate governance principles. So we have the one that focuses on the board of directors and officers of the board. And here there are 16 principles. We have assurance, which is also related to risk management, which has 4 principles. We have relationship with shareholders, which has 3 principles. Business conduct with ethics has 2 principles. Sustainability has 1 principle. Transparency and disclosure has 2 principles. And then we also have definitions. Now, let's quickly look at the responsibilities and duties of the board. And what I've tried to do here is, because our target is to be able to build up a company secretary who has the appropriate skills to be able to work with not just the board, but also with shareholders and management. Our focus will be looking at the practical applications for company secretaries when we are talking about the code of corporate governance. So the principal objective of the board is to ensure that companies are properly managed by certain strategic goals and deploying its human and financial resources effectively to attain these goals. At the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, we directors are agents of shareholders, and what the shareholder wants to know at the end of the day is, how much are you giving me back from what I have put in? So it's left for the board to lay down strategic goals on how to achieve success, on how to achieve the set goals and targets that they have laid down, so that they are sure that they can give back to the shareholders what the shareholders deserve from them. It's also to ensure the entrenchment of good corporate governance by observing the highest ethical standards, compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, and developing a framework for the delegation of authority and duties to management. So as directors, the role is not just to sit on the board and then you're saying, okay, you know what, we're just here to have oversight duties and all that. Even as members of the board, you must also ensure that, the directors must also ensure that they themselves observe the highest ethical standards. They must ensure that whatever is laid down, or whatever comes out from board meetings in terms of board resolutions or implementations that must be carried out by management, compliance with various laws and regulation, that this is done. They delegate the authority to management, and they must ensure that management complies with whatever is laid down. Now, practical application for the company secretary is that the board must have an approved charter. That is the first thing that you start with. And then for many private companies, I see that it's something that is missing. It's something that is really missing in many private companies. The board must have an approved charter which sets out its responsibilities, that's the responsibilities of the board, and terms of reference, and contains the corporate governance policies and practices. This is the roadmap for the board, and it's a guide that all boards must have. The charter helps the board in providing overall strategic leadership to the company, and it also guides in the board's oversight functions, effective stakeholder management, and growth of the company. As company secretaries, as chartered secretaries, what is our role here? It is to ensure that this document is in place, and we must begin to advise our boards properly. I remember that recently, one of my clients, who is an Austrian, has come in to do business in Nigeria. And when I was talking about, the board having a proper charter, it was like, all those things that are just documents that nobody reads and nobody, looks at. But I said, look, if you know that I have to be your company secretary, which you've appointed me, then we must do things properly. Otherwise, we're just going to be floating in the air. And as directors, you probably don't know your left and right on what to do. We look at the board structure and its composition. In line with best practice, the code recommends that the board have a mix of executive directors, non-executive directors, independent non-executive directors. I just quickly want to ask, as a small exercise, I hope we understand the difference between executive directors, non-executive directors, and independent non-exec directors. And I want quickly, if we can, for somebody to just tell me the difference between the non-exec and the independent non-exec on the board.
Good afternoon. My name is Bukola James Cole. I'm going to try. Okay, so the
Okay.
non-executive director will be the director that is not part of the day-to-day activities, the operational activities of an organization. An independent director is someone that is independent of both operations and any form of affiliation to the board. There are some certain rules. He must not have stakeholders so that he or she is able to give fair judgments and will not be found to be compromised in any way when making decisions about the organization. I think those were the two questions you asked.
Yes,
Thank you.
Kola, thank you very much. So when we say the non-exec could actually be representatives of the shareholders. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the shareholder will, okay. So Ajibala says the independent non-exec has no business dealing with the company. He owns no shares either directly or through proxy. That is very correct. So his role there is to give independent judgment. When we have the non-exec directors, they could be there, as, like I said, as representatives of the shareholders. And so sometimes you see that their judgments could, tilt towards their principles that they represent on the board. And then, of course, the executive directors are those of us that are directors, but we are also in management. So, I mean, the code recommends that we have these three groups of people, to be on the board, but especially more of the non-exec and the independent non-executive directors. Companies would need to adopt policies that allow for review of existing board composition to ensure it reflects an appropriate balance of gender, competence, independence, and integrity. So we don't want directors who will come and sit on the board for donkey years and they are not adding any value. And that is what the code tries to discourage. You must have directors that are bringing something to the table, and there must be a balance between the gender, competence, independence, and integrity. These days, everybody is talking about gender balance on the board. I remember when I was appointed on the board, aside from being, the first Nigerian employee to rise to that position, it was such a big deal for us because I was the first, in fact, the first female across I think the 5 boards that I sit on. It was a huge thing for the company and then also for my colleagues when I was appointed on the board. And now we started off as one person. We're now looking at 2 of us being females on the board, and it just keeps growing. We always say that, when women come on board, there's always a slight difference of things that would happen. And I know that since the females came on board, a lot of changes have happened in terms of what our male colleagues would have been doing previously. So we must, apart from gender, you also don't want to put a woman on the board because she's a woman. It must be a woman who is bringing something to the table. She must be competent. She must also have the requisite skills. She must also be independent, have her own independent judgment and be somebody who has integrity. So we don't just want to fill the board positions because, okay, you know what, everybody's talking about sustainability these days. Everybody's talking about good governance and having women everywhere. So let's just put this woman who doesn't know anything. She just sits there. And when we ask her to move to the left, she moves to the right. You ask her to move to, we can just toss her around. But do we have a woman on board? Yes, we have a woman on board. That's not what we're looking at now. Now, practical applications for the company secretary. So encourage the board to develop policies specific to enhancing the appropriate composition of the board and report on the performance of the board in achieving diversity on the board. So aside from when we prepare the audited financial statements, for some of us who also now prepare sustainability reports, these are things that we have to put into our sustainability report, how diversified our board is, the composition, and what we've been able to achieve with this diversity. The company secretary must also assist the board by constantly reviewing the existing board composition to ensure that it reflects an appropriate balance of required skills, experience, independence, gender, and other diversity on the board. The diversity, a diversified board brings in fresh ideas. So you don't want to keep somebody who has been there for donkey years and the person is not bringing anything to the table. When you ask the person whether there is anything, the person doesn't even know what's current, even in the business, even in the sector, what's going on in the sector. What the person wants to do is just come for board meetings, whether you read the board pack before when it's sent or not, some of them are the ones that even come to board meetings and create nuisance during the board meetings, At the end of the day, Madam Secretary, please, where is my sitting allowance? And that's what they're concerned about. So we don't want to also have those kind of directors. You want to bring in directors who are able to move the company forward. Okay, so we have a small exercise here. I want us to look at this board composition matrix. We have 6 directors in this company. And with the 6 directors, this board requires 6 different skills. I want us to look at the various directors, Mr. A, Mrs. B, Mr. C, and all the rest of them, and tell me, please, what you think is wrong with this board.
Okay, if I may, I think the board composition, you don't have enough diversity in terms of the skills. For instance, Mr. C, D, and E they all have the same skills. Yes, you don't, then Mr. A and B have the same skills. Nobody has skill E, which is required in the board. So the board needs to be more diverse in terms of the skills and experience required.
Thank you very much. I think I've taken it back again. So yes, was it? Some people have, Unola, please forgive me if I get the pronunciations wrong. I will try as much as possible to try. Unola and Victoria, I've noted your comments. If you look at this composition, Mr. F has no skill at all, no single skill, and he's sitting on this board comfortably, not bringing anything to the table at all. Now, skill E is totally missing. Nobody has that skill. And then while we have skill B in, a number of directors, there are some skills that just one director seems to have. So what do we need to do to improve this board? That's the next question. What do we need to do to improve this board?
If I may just jump in here, maybe we need to exit Mr. F in a way that will not cause challenges, or upskill him if he's willing to attain some of the skills required. It's just that we don't know what his learning curve is, and we may need to, quickly get some of these skills on board. For the ones that have just one, again, upskilling them if they're willing to. We may need to introduce someone that has skill E immediately. I don't know what that skill is, but it may be a strategic and very, very important one. So we may need to just get someone that has that skill, depending on, they already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the board. So again, depending on what the board can afford in terms of getting in a new director. Thank you.
Okay, my screen is, okay, any other comments?
Fati?
Okay, if there are no other comments, is it possible to introduce another woman on this board? So if we take out, and it's not easy to take out Mr. F, I would say that to you, especially if he's not due for retirement. It might be very difficult to take him out. So I would suggest that we upscale Mr. F, and then if we do need to take him out, we'll probably replace him with another woman on the board. If you look at this board, it's clearly male dominated. We just have one woman on the board, and that woman actually has 2 skills. And like we've all noted, we can now upskill the various skills of this board, but we can clearly see that this is a deficient board, and then you can begin to imagine what will be coming out of this board at the end of the day. So we look at officers of the board, chairman of the board, the managing director, stroke CEO, and executive directors of the board. In my earlier experience, I've worked in a company where the chairman of the board was vice, what did he call himself? I think vice chairman, called himself MD CEO, and was very dominant everywhere. Very dominant. However, what the code now tries to do is to checkmate the abuse of power by various members of the board, and also to try to separate powers between the chairman of the board and the managing director stroke CEO. So if you're chairman of the board, you're chairman of the board. You cannot be chairman of the board and be managing director stroke CEO at the same time. These 2 roles must be clearly distinct and occupied by 2 different people. And whilst we're having this, we must also still have a mix, like I said before, of both executive directors, non-exec, and independent non-exec on the board. The code spells out the duties of the various categories of members of the board to avoid overconcentration of power in one person, and also for all directors to be able to understand what their strategic roles are on the board. If you're an executive director, you understand what your role is as an executive director. If you're a non-executive director, you understand what your role is. And if you're an independent non-exec, you understand what your role is. Now, the application for the company secretary is to advise the board on the separation of powers of the chairman and managing director. And the chairman should be dissuaded from being a member of any committee. We've had instances where the chairman wants to be a member of various committees. And then what happens, when the chairman is a member of a committee? What do we think happens when a chairman becomes a member of a committee?
I think when the chairman is a member of the committee, a lot of times people, first of all, he may browbeat people. People may not be free to talk. He may suppress information if he's not a particularly good chairman. So it has a lot of negative implications a lot of times when the chairman is also a member of, especially their key committees.
Exactly, I totally agree with you, and with the various comments that have come in, especially when you have a very dominant chairman, who doesn't allow people. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, he can allow you to have your say, but it is decision that that will carry the order of the day. Some chairmen don't even need to say anything. I mean, their body language will tell you everything that they have not said verbally. The body language will clearly say it. And then, you don't want a chairman who you're going to be rubbing off on the wrong side of the table. So with the chairman being in the various committees, it creates a number of issues for members of that committee. And most of the time, they might come out with decisions that are not let's say very practicable, or the best decisions that they would have reached, because they are trying to tilt towards the disposition of the chairman. The secretary should also assist the board with the preparation and conduct of meetings and ensure timely circulation of board packs. It is not 24 hours before that meeting, or 6 hours before that meeting, or even during the meeting, the company secretary starts presenting the board packs. I mean, clearly, the directors must be able to go through whatever documents that will be placed before them to be able to make the most appropriate decisions. So as company secretaries, we must also conduct ourselves properly, prepare our own selves, before we even go to the meeting. And we must ensure that the board packs get to the directors on time. Sometimes, and I've been in a situation, honestly, where I've been told by my MD, says, don't send that pack on time. Just wait. Don't send it on time. So as company secretaries, we must be able to take that decision to say, you know what, this is the proper thing that needs to be done, and we must do it on time. We must carry out induction for new directors and advise the board on retreats if possible. Now, if we look at the previous slide we had on, that's the matrix for the director. So if, for instance, we are taking out Mr. F and we're bringing out a Mrs. F, we must be able to carry out inductions for our directors, And if it's for many of us as company secretaries, it's something we could do ourselves, but I will always suggest that we leave this to external consultants. I know that ICSAN provides very good service in terms of induction and all that. And we can advise members of the board to go on retreats. There's a lot they can learn when they go on these retreats. And as company secretaries, we must begin to put our foot forward. Like I said, we're not just there to be seen, we must be heard, and we must bring new things on board. We must ensure effective communication between all stakeholders. And if he or she, that's company secretary, is an employee, should ensure that there's a flow of information that cascades down to management. So at the end of the day, when we have board resolutions or resolutions that come out from various committees, you don't just keep it in your file. I mean, you just prepare a board resolution and it's filed. You must ensure that management also does the right thing, that those decisions that have been taken by the board are also implemented by management. And this is very vital, especially when the employee is a company secretary. It helps to manage communication between the board and the different stakeholders. So we must have the skill at our fingertips. It ensures that there's a sync between the board and management in the achievement of set goals, whilst power is not concentrated in one person. Let's look at the company secretary. Now, the code says that while the company secretary reports to the CEO/MD, he or she also has direct access to communicate with the chairman. In my practice, I've seen many times where the CEO tries to block that communication with the chairman, but we should have it at the back of our mind that yes, even though we report to, especially those of us that are employees in the company, even though we report to the MD/CEO, we still have, ultimately we report to the board. Ultimately, we report to the board and we have direct access to the chairman. And for you to have, for the chairman to be able to conduct a proper meeting, a successful meeting, 80% of it lies in the hands of the company secretary, because you must be able to guide the chairman properly, and help him through the progress of that meeting. The code sheds light on the qualities and selection process of the company secretary, and he or she shall be empowered by the board to carry out the following responsibilities and duties in addition to other statutory functions. Provide the board and directors individually with detailed guidance as to how their responsibilities should be properly discharged in the best interest of the company. I've said this severally, we're not people who are now sitting down and looking at directors while they go astray. We must be in a position to call them back when we feel that they're doing the wrong things and set them on the right track. We should be able to coordinate orientation and training of new directors. I've said this before, assist the chairman and CEO to determine the annual board plan and with the administration of other strategic issues at board levels. We must compile board papers on time and ensure that the board discussions and decisions are clearly and properly recorded and communicated to the relevant persons. I said this earlier, let's not just take minutes and then at the end of the day, we just file those minutes, and keep. And then talking of minutes, I also want to ask, what's the usual procedure in terms of when, after a board meeting, when we prepare minutes, what do we do with those minutes? Do we circulate it around to all board members, or do we just send it to the chairman? I just want to have your thoughts on that as well. Anybody wants to share with us what he or she has been doing in terms of circulation of minutes before its approval?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, usually you will, if the draft is out, you take it to the chairman. Chairman will look at it, and if it is okay, then it will be circulated to other members. That
okay,
will be the practice.
Okay, so that's your practice. Or it says that first to the MD for review, and then subsequently to only the chairman.
Yes, so, and then thereafter, if the chairman okays the draft, you can now circulate to members for the meeting, for the next meeting.
Okay, what happens in a situation, because I've seen those kind of situations, what happens in a situation where the chairman or the MD asks you to expunge some aspects of the minutes? What do we do as company secretaries?
In fact, actually,
Haliru, we can't hear you.
It happens. And, it's really a very difficult, Okay. Sorry,
okay.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello, it's not stable, really. I think you are right. It happens sometimes like that between the chairman and the CEO. But yes, in most cases, what I do is that I record what I believe is the correct, is the correct thing that happened, at the meeting. So I take the risk, really, and then let the members decide. and then which one is correct or which one is not correct. That I
Okay. I can see somebody's hand is up. I can't see the name.
Hello.
Yes.
It's a better thing to either or the
Okay. Thank you, Haliru.
Okay, so I was saying the role of a company secretary is quite dynamic. So and the truth be told, one would usually find him or herself in that kind of situation. But I think that's where the cap of being diplomatic comes in. So you probably, I mean, that relationship should exist between your MD and both the board of directors. And so at that point, you have to make your MD understand why you cannot take out this. I mean, the whole idea is corporate governance to ensure that things are properly done to be able to meet the objective of the organization. And when you start taking out facts, it then means you are going to be compromising on some
Exactly.
things that are not, going to nonsense that will not work in favor of the organization. So your diplomatic heart would come to work here, and then you should be able to talk him to understand why you have to do it. And I mean, laying that kind of principle would send a signal to both parties to say this person is not someone you can throw such issues with, and then you earn your respect, and then they start doing things that are meant to be done properly. It's not as easy as I'm saying it, but I mean, it's
I
a
know,
situation we
Bukola.
find ourselves.
I know, because in my position, in fact, I've had them say to me that they were going to report me to ICSAN and ask ICSAN to withdraw my license to practice, So it's usually not as easy as it's been said, but like you said, we need to lay down those kind of principles so that, because once they ask you once and twice and you don't do it, the truth is they don't ever come back to ask you, that same thing anymore. So we need to start putting our foot down, and we shouldn't allow them to throw us around. What you have recorded in the minutes should be in the minutes, and you shouldn't allow anybody to throw you around to have parts of the minutes expunged. We continue to look at the board committee structure. The code says is to ensure efficiency and effectiveness, the board delegates some of its functions, duties, and responsibilities to well-structured committees without abdicating its responsibilities. So when the committee makes a decision, the board cannot run away from such decisions and say, you know what, you're just a committee, and this decision that you've taken is not part of what we're supposed to do. By extension, the board committees are part of the board, and so whatever decisions they take, those sometimes may not be binding on the board, but if those decisions are taken and they're implemented and maybe something goes wrong somewhere along the line, the board cannot come back and say, it's the risk committee that took this decision, and so the responsibility, lies with the members of that committee. So the code encourages boards to create governance/remuneration committee and risk management committee in addition to the audit committee, which is already required by CAMA. So CAMA says that we must have an audit committee, but the code is saying at a minimum, you must have 3 committees. One is the governance/remuneration committee, and then the second one is the risk management committee. And I know that Mr. Olawale this morning has dealt extensively with risk management, so it's not something that we're going to be looking at in depth anymore. The board must ensure that these committees receive in an expeditious manner all requisite details to enable them discharge their duties effectively. We've talked about this earlier. So what are the applications for us as company secretaries? The company secretary must advise the board on the establishment of these committees and their composition. We have, and that's why I keep saying that the focus right now should be on private companies, because many of them exist without even a single committee. without even a single committee. And I know that, well, yes, in some cases, they might not need to have those committees because the sizes of the board are sometimes very small. You might have a board of, I mean, 2, you might have a board of 3, but where we have, I mean, up to like 5 members on the board, we should start encouraging the board to establish these committees. And that's why I said, you know, in Abisho, that it's expedient that we have the board charters in place, because it's the board charters that guides the board on exactly the kind of decisions and kind of actions, you know, it should take to be able to run properly. The committee secretary should advise on continuous training for members of this committee to enhance their skills. So if you find yourself in the audit committee and you don't have any skills in terms of finance, I mean, I don't see how much contribution you're going to be making into that committee. The same with the risk management committee or the governance committee. So the company secretary must look at the various members of the board, look at the committees they belong to, and then try as much as possible, you know, to prefer various trainings for them to go for. And we know that those trainings would, so when directors go on trainings, they don't pay out of their own pocket. It is the responsibility of the company to pay for those trainings to ensure that they have directors who have skills that are up to date and that they can provide proper service to the company. You should provide requisite and timely information to the committees. We've said this earlier. Attend and assist in the preparation of all committee meetings and ensure that notices of this meetings are sent out on time. So in terms of notices, we don't just stop at sending notices for board meetings or sending notices for EGMs or for AGMs. We must also send notices out for all committee meetings. If you cannot be present at the committee meetings, please ensure that there's somebody in place, somebody who is who has the requisite skills to be able to take minutes of those meetings, you know, and present them properly to you as company secretary, you know, so that you don't miss out anything that was discussed in the meeting. There should be a document with written report summarizing key deliberations of committee meetings, which will be presented by the committee chairpersons to the full board. So committees don't just have meetings and then after that they go to sleep. The deliberations and the decisions that are reached at those meetings must be communicated to the board. And so it's expedient for the company secretary, you know, to also have full information on all deliberations and all decisions that were reached at that meeting, so that even when the committee chairs are presenting their reports and there are certain things that are missing, you can quickly chip it in to the chairs to say this and that, you know, is missing, so that nothing is left out. Meetings of the board and the shareholders. The board is required to meet quarterly and every director having at least 2/3 attendance of all board meetings. So we don't just have a board, we don't just have directors who are sleeping directors and decide when they want to come for meetings and when they don't want to come for meetings. We must ensure that our directors attend meetings as much as possible. The general meeting shall be held annually with sufficient time allocated to shareholders to participate fully, having been provided with necessary information about the company timely. Now, in this era of COVID, let me see those of us that have been up to date with all the trainings, you know, we've had in ICSAN. Can we have general meetings virtually now? Can we have general meetings, annual general meetings virtually?
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Very good. I just wanted to be sure that all of us, you know, are abreast with that information. And where do we, so when we send out notices for this kind, for the virtual meetings, what will be the address of the venue? What will be the venue? What do you usually put as venue when the meetings are virtual?
The registered office address.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Bukola.
So while I I understand that we can have virtual meetings. I was of the opinion that it was only the limited liability companies that could have virtual meetings, and for PLCs, you could hold a proxy meeting. I'm not aware that a PLC can hold a virtual meeting, except it's new.
No. The PSOs will hold proxy meetings, but I'm just saying, previously, what the general meetings are usually, people must be in attendance physically.
Okay.
So
So
yes,
that's
people.
fine.
So yes, so
I just wanted
that's
to
what
make sure.
that's what
Okay,
I'm trying
thank
to, so that we don't just limit ourselves and say, okay, because there's COVID now, we can't attend general meetings. We can now hold our meetings virtually as well. And the venue of the meeting will be the registered address. So when you're sending out notice, you don't put venue, virtual, or in conference or Zoom call or something. Resolution should be clearly proposed.
Sorry, please, can I just ask why that is the case? On what basis does it have to be the registered office address?
Okay, so I mean, as per law, you must have a venue for your meeting. When we have meetings on Zoom, it's in the cloud. We can't have meetings in the cloud. So if we don't have any other place, you must have the office. I mean, your registered office is a place where you have, normally, if you're not going to have it anywhere else, you would have your meeting in your registered office. And so we're required to have the registered office as our place, of venue, and not in the cloud, because no meeting is ever held in the cloud. All right, so applications for the company secretary. Maintaining statutory books, including registers of members, directors, and secretaries, organizing board meetings and AGMs, preparing agendas, and taking minutes. Rendering proper and timely returns as required under CAMA. Maintaining good shareholder relations and keeping the board informed on shareholders' views. So in as much as we also have relationships with our chairman and with our directors, we should also have relationship with our shareholders, the institutional shareholders, and then, I mean, for smaller companies, the smaller shareholders. And we also must remember that as company secretaries, we do not tilt towards any shareholder. You must always maintain a very objective position where you are, You do not support one shareholder over the other shareholder. Even if the shareholder is a minority shareholder, you do not tilt to any shareholder. You must always remain in the middle to ensure that you're not compromised in any way. This ensures that the board constantly has a robust meeting and companies do not face penalties with regulatory bodies. Appointment, tenure, and re-election of directors. The board should develop a written, clearly defined, formal, and transparent procedure for the appointment of members of the board, and this is also usually found in your board charter. The criteria for selection should reflect the existing strengths and weaknesses, required skills and experience, its current age range and gender composition, and ascertain whether nominees for the position of directors are fit and proper. So this is also something that will be found in the board charter, if you have it. So when you are appointing directors, you must look at the current composition of the board before you make new appointments. If you look at what we had in the matrix we shared before, we saw that we had one particular skill where 3 directors were holding that skill, and then we had a skill that no director, clearly had. We also had a director who clearly had no skill and yet was sitting on the board. So in making recommendations for appointments, you must look at the current composition, look at the current skill, look at the diversity on the board, and then, make those recommendations. All directors must have letters of appointment as director, and in the case of the MD, there should be a contract of employment and other operational documents detailing his authority and relationship with the board. The roles and responsibilities of the non-execs should be clearly provided in their letters of appointment and board charter. So you don't just say, okay, you just appoint somebody as non-exec and the person doesn't have a letter of appointment. Please, going forward, let's ensure that whichever director that comes on the board, and like I said, it's our role as company secretaries to be able to do this. We must continue to remind the chair on the need to have this done so that things are properly documented. Subject to satisfactory performance and the provisions of CAMA, all directors should be submitted for re-election at regular intervals at least once every 3 years. We've seen positions, and a lot of times this doesn't happen. Directors sit on the board and they don't want to leave. They just feel that it's their perpetual entitlement to be on that board. And as company secretaries, please, I appeal to us that when we are preparing, or when there's an appointment being made, please be sure that you have read the constitutions of the company. That's the MEMAT. You've gone through it thoroughly to understand, the MEMAT, the board charter, and all that, to understand who can be a member of the board. Recently we had a case in one of our companies where it was an external secretary who handled that, the filing of that appointment. And then when the appointment was being made to directors, clearly the MEMAT has stated that no director who is above 70 years should be appointed, or no person above 70 should be appointed a director on the board. 2 people, and unfortunately they came from the same shareholder. They were representing the same shareholder. Both of them were clearly over 70 and they were appointed, on the board. Now, when the company secretaries were filing at CAC, with their passport, the data page of their passport, when they were going through it, they now found out that the directors were over 70. It was a huge problem for us. It was a huge problem to get those directors out, to ask them to resign, because they said as far as they're concerned, you can't take them out of the business. We tried to say, okay, you know what, why don't you bring people who are much younger than you? They refused to understand anything that we were saying. And that's because the mistake had clearly been made from the company secretary side. In fact, it was at the next board meeting that the company secretary now came and said, okay, you know what, we apologize, a mistake has been made. Mr. A and Mr. B cannot be appointed on this board. And it was a huge problem. That singular act that was done tore the company apart. The 2 shareholders went to court, and they were in court for, I think, 7 years, even up to the Supreme Court. The only reason why that case eventually died down was because one of those directors, the one over 70, one of them died. As we speak today, that company is grounded to a halt. It completely tore the company apart. So we had, and some of the directors, tilted towards, they were sympathetic towards those shareholders. And even when you were saying, look, this is what the constitution of the company says, this is what the law says, nobody was listening to that. And unfortunately, they were foreign directors. They were not even directors who are Nigerians. They were foreign directors, and it was a big issue. So please, before the appointment is being made, ensure that you even go through the profile of the director, so that, or the nominee who is being appointed, so that the wrong persons are not appointed on the board, and then it now creates issues eventually for the company. Induction and continuous training of directors. The boards are required to conduct formal induction exercise for new directors to sensitize them on the company's operation and business environment. If the director doesn't know what the company is doing, then you wonder what the person is sitting on the board, and doing. So you must also keep the person abreast of what the company does, so he understands the business of the company and is abreast with recent developments in the sector. The company secretary should suggest trainings for the board individually and as a group, depending on deficit skills. So if we go back to our matrix that we had looked at, you could even the company secretary could suggest personally, to the director to say, okay, you know what, aside from any other thing that the company would do to train you, you can even do, 1 or 2 trainings on your own to help boost up your own skills. This ensures that leaders of the organization are continuously abreast of the latest developments in the business or requisite skills for directors. Board evaluation and corporate governance and evaluation. There should be periodic assessment at least once every year of members of the board, the CEO, and the company's corporate governance practice. The outcome of the board evaluation should be utilized in determining the renewal of the director's contract and the tenure and guiding the company. So if you have, if after the board evaluation is done, you know, and you see that there's a director who is continuously not meeting up with the standards of the board, I mean, this would be a good basis for you to say, to call the person aside to say, okay, you know what, maybe during the time of re-election, this is not somebody we want to continue to keep on the board. So it's something that it's shared with the entire board at the end of the day. So it's not something that is done, you know, separately and it's done in hiding. Now, I always recommend, again, as you know, to say that that's what I mean, the beauty of what you all are doing now in terms of this training and certification, you know, so that we have external people who can come and do board evaluations for the company. Usually, if the company secretary does it, they could say, okay, you know, the person is biased towards one director or another director. But if we have an independent party who comes to do the evaluation and the report is presented to the board, let's not just have, I mean, after you've done the evaluation, please ensure that these reports are presented to the board. The board takes out time to study and discuss the reports that have been presented to them so that they can take requisite actions based on those reports, please. And like I said, it's a good basis for you to say, okay, you know what, we need to bring in better hands or change this person and all that. So the company secretary must ensure that the following areas are covered during the board evaluation, even if the company secretary is not the one carrying out the board evaluation, but you must ensure that you discuss with the consultant or the party who is doing the board evaluation and ensure that the board composition, board dynamics, functioning, you know, governance, internal controls and risk management, all those things are evaluated and assessed during the board evaluation process. Should encourage having the report presented to the full board with adequate time on the board's agenda to discuss the results and establish a clear approach for acting on the findings. So we don't just discuss it and then keep it aside. We must also have a clear action plan on how to improve, you know, the company, improve the board based on what we have seen. And it's our duty as company secretary to continue to remind the board. We must make conscious effort to continue to remind the board that we have discussed this, but you know, appropriate actions have not been taken. And then these actions must have a timeline and must have milestones that must be met. And in doing this, you know, you must maintain confidentiality throughout the process. So, I mean, you're not going to talk about what Mr. A is doing or what Mr. A has said, because it's most likely that you're going to be, I mean, you have all the records and all the discussions have passed through you. So please make sure that whatever is given to you in confidence, you maintain that confidentiality for everyone. This ensures that directors' re-election are based on performance and that there are people who will add value to the company. The evaluation of the company's corporate governance practices ensures that its governance standards, practices, and processes are adequate and effective. And I always say, please, let's also, you know, before you start the board evaluation process, for some boards, and I know that I've had, I've been company secretary to one of those kind of boards that says, number one, it's a waste of money. They tell you that it's a waste of money. Number two, they feel is a witch hunting process. We must be able to dissuade the minds of our directors. So prior to having that, it would be good for company secretaries to just lay it on the table so that directors understand what the board evaluation process is really all about. That it's not to witch hunt anybody or to take anybody out, but it's actually to improve the performance of not just the board, but even the company in its entirety. Business conduct and ethical culture. Companies should have a code of ethics and statement of business practices, which should be implemented as part of the corporate governance practices of the company. Like I said, for many of us, you know, we have all those things written down. You know, if you go to some companies, you will see it, you know, framed, nicely framed and on their walls. But how many of them are actually doing it. So it's important that when we have this code of ethics, and business conduct and practices, we must also ensure that our directors, because it's from the board that it cascades down to management. Our directors are people who, have ethical standards, they're people of integrity. And for the company secretary, you will not come out to say it, to their faces that Mr. A, you're not doing well. But I think it was Bukola that said we should try to have personal relationships with directors. I know that I do that, personal relationship with directors. And then you can call them aside, outside the workspace to say, I've noticed this and I think you should go for this training, or this training is available. Why don't we look at doing this, and put things in place for us to be able to do well. The company secretary should assist the board in developing the code of ethics, and if an employee of the company, monitor the compliance. So if the company doesn't have a code of ethics and best practice, it's something that you should be looking at doing now. Like we said, our role has continued to diversify. We're not just people who now sit on the board and we take minutes. Every day our role keeps changing. Every day our role keeps changing. Even before I was appointed the director, I know that I was heading ethics. Anything concerning ethics and compliance, I had that before I was appointed. So, we should make drastic efforts to even continue to improve ourselves, because it's the skill that you as a company secretary has that the board will identify, and then say, okay, you know what, we can add more to your plate and see whether you can run with it. So he should ensure that members of the board are exposed to ethical trainings and must continue to serve as the conscience of the company and remind directors of their duties in order to prevent corrupt practices in the company. In Nigeria, this is easier said than done. This is, the honest truth. It's easier said than done, and it's difficult to, monitor who practices what kind of corrupt practices, or, but one thing that we must know is, in as much as the directors are liable, even we as company secretaries are also liable to any acts of corruption in the company. So we must be very, very, very careful about that. I always say, please, before you sign anything, please read it. Before you sign anything, and don't let anybody pressure you into signing something that you have not read. It is very, very, very important. It's very, very important. This helps to protect the reputation of the company through good conduct and enhances investors' confidence in the business. So, nowadays we are going beyond just good governance. Mr. Olawale mentioned something about ESG. Many investors now are looking at how sustainable the business is, how sustainable your business is, what is reputational risk that the business has, because one of the greatest risks that any company can have is that of reputation, especially in this age of social media. We see a lot that happens, especially in that one thing happens and it's all over the place. And no investor wants to lose money because of that kind of thing. No investor wants to do that. So it's our duty to help our directors to maintain good ethical conduct. Now, what we do in our own business, aside from the fact that we have our board charters and we have our appointment letters, something that I also do is that every 6 months, I organize a training, one for the board, one for management, and then one for all the other employees. And that training is basically on ethics and our code of conduct of our business. I do that every 6 months. And after that training, everybody signs a certification for me, which is filed. And I know that I think 2 years ago, we had such issues, though it wasn't with a director, but it was with a very senior member of management. And I remember that when I was giving this training, that's this kind of attitudes that we have said, don't worry, I know all these things, I've read everything. I said, look, sir, if there's any single issue we have with you, this document that you're signing now takes you out of the company. And he said, no, don't worry, there's nothing. And unfortunately for him, you know, and one thing we also do is we don't just even stop with our employees, we also take the training out to our suppliers, to our vendors, to our contractors. So we're not just saying to our people that the bulk stops with you. Even with our suppliers, we go through this training. Now, unfortunately for this senior member of management, you know, the whistle was blown on him, and the person who blew the whistle was one of, I think, one of our consultants, I think our tax consultant, because he was asking for some kind of tip-off, you know, from the consultant. And then the consultant came back and said, please, madam, didn't you have this this ethics training that you're always giving us? Didn't you have it with Mr. Lagbaja? Because he came back and this is what he's asking me to do. And so immediately we took it up, we investigated the matter, and it was true. Unfortunately for him too, he was still under probation, you know, and you know that when you're under probation, I mean, the company doesn't have to give you a reason to say go. If we feel that you're not doing, you're not up to our standard, we can ask you to go. And so we called him in and we just said, well, you know, we've looked at you, we've looked at what you brought to the table, and it's clearly not just what we want, you know. And we let him go immediately. So it's a kind of practice that you can also put down. It's been helping us a lot. And, you know, for us, there's no retaliation against anybody. It's clearly in our policies. There's no retaliation. So even the cleaner can come and blow a whistle on the director. So everybody is on their feet. And I encourage people to do this. So you're not just training your directors, you're not just training your management staff, but even you're going beyond that to also train your consultants, you know, your consultants, your other stakeholders and all that, so that everybody knows what, you know, is required in your business. The behavior of members of the board models a top-down commitment of ethical standards from the board and management level to employees, contractors, suppliers, etc. in their dealings with the company. Risk management and whistleblowing. The code mandates that the board establishes a risk management framework which defines, assesses, monitors, and manages the company's key business risk to safeguard shareholders' investments and the company assets. I know that Mr. Adewale or Mr. Olawale has dealt on this, you know, a lot this morning, but let's also remember that the company secretary should also help the board to weigh its risk appetite so that it doesn't take more than it can chew in terms of risk management, okay? And like I said, always look out for the various business risk. Mr. Olawale listed those ones out, and also for your reputational risk, because these are things that can bring you down in a minute. The board should also establish a whistleblowing framework to encourage stakeholders to bring unethical conduct and violations of the law and regulations to the attention of an internal or external authority so that appropriate actions can be taken in the verification of the allegation and the applications of sanctions to remedy any harm done. Please, when these things are brought to your notice, maybe as company secretary, be sure to investigate them, because a number of times we've seen a lot of frivolous allegations that are thrown on management, that are thrown on directors or anybody. Please be sure to investigate them and make sure that whatever is being said is true before appropriate sanctions are being passed on the defaulting party. The company secretary should assist the board in developing these documents and ensure that the framework is made known to both employees and the organization's external stakeholders. So let's not just build documents, like I said, that we keep on the shelf, and the only time we bring them out are during the periods of board evaluation. So even during your board evaluations, when you're going to be carrying out board evaluations, please also, you can also speak to employees of the company. Don't think that it just ends with members of the board. You can pick out one or two members of management, you know, other employees that you can speak to, so that you are able to understand whether the various policies, you know, and SOPs are actually being followed, or there are things that are just being kept on the shelf till the day of evaluation. The board must give assurance to all stakeholders that there will be no retaliation on whistleblowers. I said that earlier on. So the code recognizes the need for companies to pay attention to the issues of stability, which includes environmental and social matters. I think here we're talking about sustainability and disclosure. The code recognizes the need for companies to pay attention to the issues of sustainability, which includes environmental and social matters, occupational health and safety issues, and communities and supply chains. This is not only to project the company as a responsible corporate citizen, but also so that the company remains successful in its business performance. So right now, if you're following the global trend, there's a lot of discussions around sustainability. And when we're talking about sustainability, we're looking at the environment, climate change, how we use energy. We're looking at social matters in terms of how employees are treated, gender equality, inclusiveness, diversity. We're looking at occupational health and safety issues in the workplace. How do our employees have access to proper health care? We're looking at communities, how do we impact on the various communities where we do our businesses? We see what's happening in the Niger Delta region. And not even just that, in various communities where we do businesses. I know that recently there was a small community that I visited when we were doing our environmental monitoring. So I told the consultant that I wanted to go with him during one of those visits. So it was the social impact assessment that we were doing. And it was so pathetic to see the state of this community. This community is surrounded with, I would say, over 30 big companies in Nigeria, located in Ota. Some of the houses there are still mud houses. Still mud houses. They had no access to clean water. They were still using firewood and all that. I came out of that place in tears. And one of the things I told our company was, look, our business is situated, around this area, and we have a community there, and we must do something for them. And I'm not looking at we doing, because we want to make name and say we are doing CSR and all that. But right now, we must also begin to look at how we help to uplift communities, especially communities that are in their need of our help. And within that community, that place is an industrial estate, and you have a lot of pollution going on in that estate, and yet we have that community there. The community is an indigenous community. It was the first, a community that came into that place before the government started selling the land, and then they started moving them out. I think currently there are about 150 people in that community, but the state they are in is just pathetic. And so we must also begin to look at those issues as company secretaries. We must begin to look at those issues. Look at your supply chain management. Do you have child labor in your supply chain? So those are questions that you need to keep asking. Your supply chain, can it be identified with any act of corrupt practices? Because one thing, recently, we just had one of our recent trainings with our vendors. And one of the things I told them is, look, I work for Globalec. That's who I work for, But Globalec has over like 100 suppliers, has vendors and all that. Now, if one of those suppliers is linked with any corrupt practice, it still comes back to us, because we say, is it not this company ABC that supplies Globalec with this kind of service? And so if they are doing this kind of thing, there might be something, that Globalec is also not doing right. So you don't also want to be associated with supply chains that are doing the wrong thing. So when you're looking at your own people, please also look externally so that you know that you're carrying the business, to run for a long term. The company's boards and individual directors must commit themselves to transparent dealings and to the establishment of a culture of integrity and zero tolerance to corruption and corrupt practices. We continue to pray that in this our Nigeria, that God will continue to help us to, do this. But like I said, as company secretaries, we ourselves must be people of integrity, and as much as possible, we should help our directors, to also build this practice so that it becomes a culture in the organization. And like I said initially, when it becomes a culture in the organization, you're not now struggling to put things right, because it's just a way that you do things, and things now run smoothly and you don't have issues. At the end of the day, you end up having a very successful, organization, which is what the shareholder wants. The code also encourages companies to engage in increased disclosure, even beyond the statutory requirements in CAMA, in order to foster good corporate governance. So when you're doing your disclosure, please don't only disclose the good part of it. You're also encouraged to disclose the bad part of it, the ones that you're not doing well. And then in your report, you can say, yes, we didn't do this properly, but this is what we're planning to do in future to remedy this action. So let's not just focus on the good part and say, yes, everything is fantastic. Because if you have investors who come in, to do their due diligence, proper due diligence in the company, they take that to your report, and then they also look at their own report. And if the two don't, synchronize, I mean, the investor can just easily walk out. It's always better to put it up front that this is what we're not doing properly, but we can always do better. The company secretary should make a case for the practice of sustainability in the company and can be a driver of this process. I encourage us now, like Mr. Olawale said initially, that there's so much we can practice as chartered secretaries. For those of us who are really chartered secretaries, there's so much we can practice. Let's not even just limit ourselves to being, company secretaries. We can be drivers of sustainability, and that's what everybody is talking about now. That's the current trend now, sustainability, because it also, sustainability encompasses even corporate governance in itself. So we can be drivers of this process. He or she must endeavor to advise the board on the necessity to provide timely disclosures to both internal and external stakeholders with relevant and reliable information about the quality of the company's governance practices. This opens the company to attract socially responsible investors and helps them to grow the organization and builds the organization's reputation, especially with when you have international agencies, looking at you, or when you have foreign investors looking at you. Recently now, I know that a number of lenders now in Nigeria have started also asking sustainability questions. Yes, they're waking up late, but they've started doing that now. And then that determines, the kind of funds they want to put into, your business. Because nobody wants to put funds into a company that is not socially responsible. No investor, especially the foreign investors, nobody wants to do that now, because they don't want that link coming to their name that they are funding a company that is, not doing the right thing. I want us to look at this table. So we have here, we have environmental, we have social, we have governance. Now under environmental, the various drivers for good corporate citizenship we're looking at to be energy consumption, pollution. I know recently I was driving to Abeokuta, and then one of the companies that, in fact, the company is said to be one of the best companies in ESG. And I was driving past their factory, and the amount of pollution, that I saw in the air. I took a video and I sent it to, one of our consultants. I said, look, let's not just say these things because they look good on paper. Let's be able to practice it. Climate change, we see what's happening now in terms of the climate. I think this year was good for us in Nigeria. But last year, if you realize last year, we hardly had rain last year in Nigeria. We hardly had rain, and all that's due to climate change. Waste production, how do we manage our waste? We look at our drains, our drainages now. And I've been telling myself I probably need to start a business of collecting plastic bottles, because it's just what fills up our drainages. And then, like I always say, tomorrow we say the government is not doing the right thing. But yet you have somebody who drinks water and then throws it into the drainages. Now, one of the things that we started last year was a campaign against bringing plastic bottles to the company. into the company. So if you know that you're going to bring a plastic bottle, please make sure that that plastic bottle is clean, is used, and you're going to continue to use it. What we did last year, beginning of last year, was to give, we made bottles for all employees. We made bottles for all employees so that you don't constantly bring in plastic bottles into the office, and then, we have issues with recycling and all that. We're also looking at issues of biodiversity. Under social, you're looking at human rights, child and forced labor, community engagement, health and safety, stakeholders relations, and employee relations. One of the things that our CEOs don't want to hear under the social aspect of it is the comparison between the CEO's pay and the pay of other employees. We've started looking at that right now. During last year, when the COVID really hit us, there's a company where I'm a director, and that's one of the things that I'm so thankful for, being appointed on the board. And then the CEO on his own just decided, okay, you know what, we can't afford to be paying people anymore. So because of COVID, people should go and sit at home. And the best way he found that he could do it was just to send text messages to people and say, please, your services are no more needed. Please just go and stay at home till I need it. And so that issue was escalated to me as ESG director. And then, I took it up and we had a board meeting on it. And then the board prevailed on him that at this point in time, you cannot sack people. Now, one of the reasons why the board prevailed on him was I also I took a step further and I asked for the pay structure. I said I wanted to see because as an expatriate, I wanted to see what he was earning. And I also wanted to see what every other employee was earning. And then the people who were being let go, I wanted to see what they were earning. Now, when I was making my presentation at the board, and I told him clearly, I said, look, your salary alone is 3 times what all your other employees get. So if you're talking of cutting costs, let's start with you. Let's start with cutting your own salary. And so people are also now looking at these things, and we must be very careful about it. Under governance, we are looking at political affiliations. Mr. Lawale mentioned recently, 2023 is coming. How politically affiliated are your companies to various politicians? Are you funding them? And then after funding them, they get into office, you now require them to, pay you back in different kinds of ways. How independent are members of the board? Can all members of the board speak independently, or are they people that are like just puppets on the board? Do we have conflict of interest where you're a director on several boards and you know that these companies, are in conflict with each other? What is the executive compensation like? Transparency and disclosure, shareholders' right, like I said, whether it's the minority shareholder or the majority shareholder, all shareholders must be given, their rights. Now we look at good corporate governance citizens matrix. A lot of times when people do CSR, they tend to say that, they are doing CSR, but what they basically do is philanthropy. So if you look at where we have on the left, we have benefits to the society. You give, it's high, the benefit to the society is actually high, but what you're basically just doing is philanthropy. It's just basically philanthropy. Whether they need it or not, you're just putting in, you're just throwing in money to that community, whether it makes sense, whether it improves their lives or not. Yes, it's high, but it's basically philanthropy. You're not doing it to sustain that community. You're not doing, and we see it a lot of times on the televisions, and people go and donate this just to make names for themselves, not basically because they want to help the community. Now, when it's low, you also set up pet projects. The benefit to the society is low. Benefit to the business is low. You're just doing it, for doing sake. We look at propaganda, okay? The benefits to the society is low, benefits to the business is high. Yes, you make a lot of name from doing it, but the society doesn't really benefit from it, but it makes good name for you. And then you look at partnering, which is where we should all be looking at. You're partnering with the community because it benefits the community and it also benefit the company at the end of the day. I mean, if you look at, and it's not just the Niger Delta anymore, look at what's going on in our country, Nigeria today, where you see the poor getting poorer, communities continue to suffer. And and I keep saying, look, as long as these communities remain in abject poverty, there is no company that is going to make progress in any of those regions. So what we need to focus our attention to now is partnering with our communities in the way that not just the community benefiting, but even we as a business, you know, will also benefit. And there's something I keep saying, you know, if whatever you're doing is not sustainable, then eventually you will not have a viable business at the end of the day. Impact on organizational success. We are coming towards the end of our slide. The code defines the minimum standard of corporate governance for company. It is the very minimum that you can do. The very minimum. Like I said, there are other codes that are still out there, you know, that are even stricter than this one. So if you have nothing at all, if the company has nothing at all, this is the very minimum that as company secretaries that we can present to the board and say, please, let's have these measures in place, you know. And where we have conflicts, you know, with other codes, we take the code that has the stricter measure. That's what we basically do. So we take the one that has a stricter measure and then we leave this one behind. Application of the code ensures that companies are able to build stronger boards composed of diverse skills, personalities, and knowledge who will navigate the company to achieve its set goals and objectives. The company builds a more reputable organization that abides with higher standards of ethical practice, and it cascades down to the entire organization and its supply chain. Organizations are attuned to becoming sustainable organizations, which are not just focused on the bottom line, but also recognize the importance of paying attention to the environment, their employees, the communities where they do business, the supply chain, and also to governance. Directors remain learning directors who understand what their duties are and are only re-elected on the board based on performance and their contribution to the growth of the company. The role of the company secretary as a governance practitioner is recognized, you know, in the code, and it's given its due accord and authority to contribute to the success of the board in particular and the organization in general. I want us to watch this 2-minute video and also just pick one or two things as company secretaries. Thank you. Anyway, basically what this video was just going to explain to us was the various attributes that we need to have as company secretaries, okay? So that we're not people that should be seen, that we're people who also should be heard, and we should be able to make independent judgments irrespective of, I mean, those we have on the board as directors. Sorry, let me stop this. Move. Now let's look at attributes of the company secretary. I hope you can all still hear me, please.
Participants. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. So attributes of company secretaries, like I said, our role has continued to grow, and now we're looking at being governance expertise. We must have an eye for detail. We must have effective communication skill. We must be people of integrity and of sound judgment. We also must have our own independence as a people. We must be committed to our duties. We must be committed to organizations. We must be committed to our boards. We must have good planning skills and organizational knowledge. So, I mean, like that video was saying, we must have an understanding of the organization, because if you don't even understand what your organization is doing, then, I mean, how do you want to become an effective secretary? And this is especially for those that are external secretaries. You know, it's really good that you understand what the organization's business is all about, understand the sector that the organization operates in, so that when you're giving advice, you know, you can give very good advice to the board. Core competencies of company secretaries: a working knowledge of corporate and security laws, demonstration of presence and excellent communication skills, like we had said before. Even though you don't need to make yourself so assertive, but you're not somebody who should be kicked around. And like I said, directors always want to test the waters. They usually want to test the waters to see, okay, whether this person is somebody we can easily shove around. But once you have said no, you know, 2 times, they usually won't come back to say, okay, they want to try to push you around. You must be sensitive and intuitive towards the CEO and directors, you know, try to develop a personal relation with as many people as you can, so that you can understand their own thoughts towards the end of it.
Be a facilitator. It's about putting the processes in place that allow things to happen. This means that you are not the person that's actually.
Secretariat, let's stop the video and then let's continue with the rest of the training, please. Thank you. Okay, so I was saying the company secretary should be able to read signs and provide early warnings to management on things that are going around, either in the business or in the sector in which they operate in. Be able to mediate and assist in achieving consensus, especially, you know, with members of the board. And we know that there are different boards, there are different dynamics. We have different directors who come with all sorts of dynamics on the board and all that. So we should be able to mediate between the different directors, different committees and all that, to be able to achieve overall success. The ability to overcome bureaucratic thinking in the company. So our company shouldn't be boggled down with a lot of bureaucracies. We should be able to move beyond that. A forward-looking company, a positive thinking company. We should not be a more of a reactive company, but rather a proactive company. You should pay attention to details. I said it before, you should pay attention to details. You should be flexible and creative. So in as much as I'm saying, okay, there are certain things that you must put your foot down, but even in putting your foot down, please try to be flexible around it. And we've seen what's the last 1.5 years has been with us and COVID. So you must be able to think of ways of making things work. So if we can't meet physically, if we can't do this, you must be able to prefer other solutions to the board on making things work. There should be a sense of balance, no matter how pressured a situation. And like I said, you know, earlier, I've had people that have told me that they will write ICSAN and withdraw my certificate and withdraw my license. But the truth is this, in fact, in those times, I've told them, please feel free to go to ICSAN, and then be sure that you tell ICSAN what you're asking me to do. And then you know whether, you know, they would give you the opportunity of withdrawing that license or withdrawing my certificate and all that. We must be able to maintain our sense of judgment, maintain our sense of balance, no matter who is pressurizing us to do the wrong thing. In conclusion, as the importance of effective corporate governance continues to be critical in today's environment, the responsibilities of the company secretary also continues to evolve from that of an administrative servant of the board to one which encompasses a much broader role of acting as a board advisor and having the responsibility for the organization's corporate governance. And we see that these are two Please mute. So we can see that these are two different worlds apart. One, you used to be an administrative servant of the board, and in this other world, you're a board advisor, and that is where we're all striving to be right now. The company secretary must begin to assume the roles and take up the responsibility of ensuring that his or her company has a corporate governance structure and framework in place and assist with the implementation of these structures and frameworks. One of these frameworks would be to effect the annual evaluation of the board and the CEO to appraise their performance to ensure that the board remains continually effective. The company secretary must also begin to think outside the box, not limiting himself or herself to the practice of company secretarial practice, but must also begin to acquire knowledge in areas of compliance, ethics, sustainability, etc., to ensure that he or she stays up to date with the current knowledge needed to fulfill the role of the modern day company secretary. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation today. I want to thank you very much for your very active participation and having listened attentively. Our role as company secretaries is not easy. It is really not easy, but I believe that if we continue to put in our best, it will not just continue to, I mean, especially for those of us that are in active service as company secretaries in various organizations, it could grow beyond that. I've seen it for myself, going from, and I'm still company secretary anyway, but I also wear two hats, one as company secretary and also one as a director. And I keep saying that if I hadn't put in everything that I have learned from ICSAN and from, you know, even my own personal trainings, because I take out time also to train myself, even while the organization is training me, put in the necessary skills that I should have, think outside the box, challenge yourself. I mean, challenge your management, challenge your board, because these are things that I was also doing. Let them see that you can grow beyond the role of just company secretary, you know, and start doing other things. Now we're looking at board evaluation. Let us take up, you know, as ICSAN, take up that role seriously as board evaluators and fly with it. As Mr. Lawale said, there's no role is kept distinct for any particular occupation or any kind of professionals. We're versatile charter secretaries, we're versatile people, and I believe that we should continue to make use of this versatility and put it into practice. And I believe that the sky will always be our limit. Thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them now.
Thank you very much, Lady Chetanwa-Bweke, for your wonderful and insightful presentation. Dr. Adeyinka Hassan, the chairman of the committee that is scheduled with executing this program, and the council member is raising his hand to say something. Doctor, sir, you have the floor, sir. Our chairman, Dr. Adeyinka Hassan, you have the floor, sir. Doctor, sir, you have the floor. Okay, maybe we'll come back to him later. So, distinguished participants, you have all listened to Lady Chetanwa-Bweke's presentation, and you've also participated in it. So please, this is the time for us to ask our questions, make comments, and if you have observations, we can also say so now. So you have the floor, our dear participants. Any questions? Okay, Mr. Michael Emeka is raising his hand. Please go ahead, sir. Mr. Michael Emeka, please go ahead, sir.
Please unmute yourself and speak if you can unmute yourself, because I think, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ma, for such wonderful lecture. I've learned a lot today as a company secretary. Please, I'd like you to throw more light on when you were discussing about venue of a virtual meeting. You say that even though it's going to be virtual, but in writing your venue, perhaps in when you're trying to invite or sending meeting notices, you have to state that the venue will be the company registered address. So I'm wondering why it should be so, even when the venue will be virtual. Can you kindly throw more light on that? Thank you.
Okay, so if we look at the requirements of CAMA in preparing notices, if you go back and look at the requirements of CAMA, you must have a venue for your meeting. You must have a venue for your meeting. And like I said, being on the cloud is not a venue. You're on the cloud. So in the absence of having any other physical place to gather, because we know we're not gathering physically, so your venue now becomes your registered address. It's something that is required by law. But because we are not gathering physically, we must fulfill that aspect of the law that says we must have a place where we're having a meeting. And then that's our registered address. But you do not put your venue as Zoom or conference call. That's not a venue. And then you cannot send out a notice without having a venue.
Lady Chita,
Yes,
Chita, can you hear me?
Yes,
hello?
I can hear you, Doctor.
Okay, I've been sending you messages since, but it appears you are not ready.
Sorry.
I wanted to add my perspective on two issues, but let me deal with this issue of venue first. The CAMA regulation actually took care of this. And if you recall when COVID came to us suddenly, like a black swine, there were a lot of public opinion, and CAMA had to respond. Like you rightly said, the venue of every meeting is supposed to be the registered office of the meeting, of the company. But going by CAMA regulations, when the CAMA allowed and introduced the virtual meeting, it has been recognized that any venue that the meeting itself, and when I say the meeting itself, like if it's a board meeting, members constituting the meeting agree to be the venue of the meeting. Take, for instance, if the head office of our company is 48B Lasode Crescent, for reasons best known to the directors, if they agree that the venue of the meeting will be the office of the company secretary, so be it. If they agree that the venue will be the office of the chairman for record purposes, so be it. So that's just the clarification I want to make. So we can make do with the regulations of CAMA on this. It stated it clearly that the venue of every virtual meeting, first and foremost, is the registered office of the meeting. However, depending on where, because they have that leverage to decide where they want to recognize, because it just basically say, or such place agreed by members of the meeting to be recognized as the venue of the meeting. So I hope that clarifies it. Then there was something we discussed, and it's nice that's one of the benefits of this kind of forum, so that you can settle issues in your mind if you've been having challenges. I was saying when I was delivering my paper yesterday, on a daily basis, we keep learning. When you stop learning, it's as good as dead. There were a good number of takeaways I took yesterday. I get very excited when I'm actually delivering papers, because in the process, I'm also brushing up myself and learning. Now, I like to share my perspective about the issue of how we handle minutes of the meeting. Now, the company secretary is in a dilemma. And I agree, I have seen some comments on the chat box where somebody said the company secretary is going to be hired by the MD, is going to be promoted by the MD, yet we said the company secretary should do so much. How does he do it without getting into trouble with the management that will hire and fire him? I agree with this fellow that the company secretary is in a dilemma. And somebody also responded that this is one of the areas where the company secretary needs to wear the cap of a diplomat, somebody who is who can handle issues diplomatically. But you see, in my young days as company secretary, I remember in those days, I will write my minutes and then I just want my minutes to be validated. And then I will take it to the MD to say, look at it for me if everything is in order. And one of the times, one of the chairmen of the committees just rang me and made some inquiries about the minutes of a particular meeting. And I said to him, oh, I just left the MD's office. And he was like, okay, what were you doing with the MD? Because I called the MD and the MD didn't say anything to me like you were there. Because I was telling him I had his discussion, I was there. Of course, I wouldn't do that today because I was much younger then. I'm talking about 20 years ago or so. And he said, oh, I told him I went to show him the minutes so that he can help me review it before we bring it up to the board meeting. You know what the chairman said? So this is how you give the minutes to the MD to doctor before you come to the meeting. And since then, I learned my lesson in a very hard way. Now, let me tell you what I do now as a more experienced company secretary. I give all the directors equal opportunities. So when I'm sending the minutes, I don't send to chairman or MD separately. I send it to all of them at once. Let them make their comments. Because as a company secretary, I don't like to say you are an umpire because indeed you are not. But you are not meant to take sides at meetings. And you know, you can't take disputes away from, especially when you have a large board, there will be people who agree. In fact, sometimes they do meeting before meeting, they do meeting after meetings. So for me now as an experienced company secretary, if I'm confident about what I have put down, all I do is as I'm sending it to the chairman, I'm copying every other person. I said they should peruse and comment. So, and then I will harvest all their comments. And then if I agree, if I don't agree, we will talk about it and then we'll smoothen it out. And then I bring it to the meeting straight. At least it will go with their board pack. They review. If they disagree with issues, we'll come and slug it out at the meeting and then we make progress. So I want us to be able to settle these issues so that people, especially in-house secretaries, so that they won't be having this challenge. There are certain times that if you are assertive and confident about what you are doing, believe me, even the directors will respect you. All the boards where I serve as company secretary today, honestly, sometimes I come back home. My wife is also a member of the institute. And I tell my wife, I even forget that I'm secretary on this board because the kind of respect they accord other directors is the kind of respect they accord me. And that will only happen where you are diplomatic and assertive about issues. You know, I don't want one MD or one director to come and be meeting me to say, no, this is not what we discussed. I will just post it to all of you at the same time. If you have your comments and issues, send it back to me. I will harvest it. We'll bring it to the meeting and slug it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I would like to share an experience, a similar experience with this. I think maybe about 3 years ago, I was supposed to send out notice for a meeting, but I wasn't available or I didn't have access to internet. And then I'd sent the minutes to the MD to go through. And he clearly wanted me to expunge some things from the minutes. I refused to do that. Now, because I wasn't around, my assistant took over that position and he pressured her so much, you know, to take out that part of the minutes, you know. And I clearly kept telling her, you know, don't touch the minutes, send it as it is to all directors. But, you know, because of this thing of the MD is the one that will promote me, the MD is the one that will pay my salary and all that, she took the one that he sent the minutes that he wanted to her. He sent it to her and then she sent it out with the notice. Immediately she sent it out, 2 directors came back with comments and said, look, there's some parts of this minutes that are missing because I remember we clearly discussed A, B, C, and these are the resolutions that came out of it. I just washed my hands out of that thing. I said, you know what, madam, it is between you and the MD to sort out this issue. And it was from there she clearly understood that. I told her, I said, I have always told you, you must be assertive in certain things. There's nothing he will do to you. There's nothing, you know. So she learned her lessons from, and you know, when the thing came out, the MD just sent it back to her, said, look, oh, we're sorry, we apologize. He was saying to the other directors, we apologize. It's actually a mistake from Madam Fumi. She was the one that mistakenly took that part of the minute. Because the truth is this, when other directors start raising their own eyebrows, the MD will, clearly not want to be in the midst of all that wahala and confrontation and all that. So he just steps out. So it's for you as company secretary to stand your ground and say, you know what, this is what is on ground. And sometimes, I record minutes and I tell him, look, if you don't allow me put this thing into the minutes, and I send out what is recorded, it's also not for your benefit. So somehow you have to find a way of working around. I also do this, what Dr. Hassan said, there are some boards that I'm on, especially if they are very cantankerous board members and all that. I just send to everybody. So it depends on the kind of board I'm dealing with. I just send to everybody, let everybody have a look at it. If you have comments, you can come back to me. Even between themselves, they now agree on what the minutes should be, and then they send it back to me as company secretary, and then that's the final draft that we shoot out for the next board meeting. So thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for that. That's very insightful input. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. Somebody, maybe we can just take one or two more questions and then we'll wrap up. Someone says, in the Nigerian environment, how can you exit or suggest directors exit without causing attrition?
Like I said initially, it's usually not easy. That's the honest truth. It's usually not easy. But for me, what I always do is I just follow Kama. That's just what I do. I just follow what Kama provides. So if the board needs to exit a director, just follow the procedures of Kama, and especially when the director is not due for retirement or something. So, I mean, and I think an EGM will be held. The director has to come and defend himself. When you send the special notice, to everybody and you send to him, he has to come out, because the board, the Kama provides for that if you're exiting a director, you send special notice and the director has to come and defend himself if there's need for that to happen. So I try not to boggle myself with board politics. That's, in my practice, if you always stay on the right lane of governance, you're always backed up by the law. And that is always what I've done. And when people come to me with this kind of experience and all that, I always tell them, look, do you know what? Just follow what Kama provides. If at the end of the day, the director should exit, let him exit, but it will be a decision that has been treated fairly and squarely, and then that exit can be done properly, but not in the sense that you as company secretary, you're compromising yourself and it looks as if you're taking sides. Like I said, never take sides with anybody. Never take sides with anybody, whether it's director or shareholder, because at the end of the day, I've been in a situation. Remember when I said the company that we had issues with, and we went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, the day that these people reconciled, okay, I was called in fact, I was in my office when my chairman called me in, and they were, so these two people, these two shareholders that have been in court for 7 years, I came in and they were eating from the same plate. Honestly, you know what, when you say you're taken aback, I was taken aback. I went out and came back. And I'm like, really, that this can happen? This can happen. Now, the director, I mean, the director and other members of management that had taken sides with the other shareholders, when they were deciding the fates of people who will stay and who will go, those ones were the people that they penciled down and said, okay, you know what, clearly these ones should exit the company. So I always advise, never take sides, be on the right lane of the law, and then let that be your guiding principle. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.